He left everything for success, but 5 years later, a meeting with his ex reveals a shocking secret: twin daughters he never knew existed. The evening sunlight filtered through the glass facades of Manhattan's financial district, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets below. Clara Harrison navigated the crowded sidewalk with a confident stride, her tailored navy suit and neatly tied bun exuding professionalism. 5 years ago, her reflection in the mirrored buildings would have shown a different woman, exhausted, heartbroken, and struggling to piece her life back together after Eduardo's abrupt departure. Now, she had risen from the ashes of that devastation, driven by her daughters and her unyielding resolve to succeed. Inside the towering headquarters of Martinez Pharmaceuticals, Clara took a deep breath. This was no ordinary presentation. It was her opportunity to land a monumental deal with Eduardo's company. Her meticulous preparation had been driven by a mix of ambition and an unspoken desire to prove she had moved beyond the shadow of her former life. As she entered the sleek, minimalist conference room, her eyes scanned the executives gathered around the polished table. At the far end sat Eduardo Martinez, his commanding presence unmistakable even after all these years. Eduardo's sharp suit and composed demeanor were a stark contrast to the man Clara had once known. Yet, as their eyes met, a flicker of recognition and something unspoken passed between them. For a moment, Clara's practiced composure wavered. The sight of him wasn't just a reminder of betrayal. It was a painful confrontation with the man who had walked away, unaware of the lives he left behind. But Clara quickly steeled herself. This meeting wasn't about their shared past. It was about her future and the two little girls waiting at home. Unaware of the bombshell about to drop, Eduardo's focus remained on the numbers Clara presented. He was impressed by her confidence and expertise, though there was an undercurrent of familiarity in her voice and gestures that he couldn't quite place. As Clara spoke, her words were measured, but her thoughts raced. She felt the weight of her daughters' faces in her mind, Emily's curiosity and Sophia's gentle wisdom, and reminded herself of the stakes. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a step towards securing their future. The presentation concluded with a round of applause, and Eduardo, still oblivious to the storm brewing, approached Clara for a handshake. "Exceptional work," he remarked, his tone professional but warm. Clara nodded, her smile tight. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A quick glance revealed a message from Rose, her mother, confirming she had picked up the twins from school. Relief mixed with tension as Clara thanked Rose silently for her steadfast support. As Eduardo continued to speak, Clara's guard began to falter. His questions were pointed yet respectful, a reminder of the ambitious man she had once loved. Yet beneath his polished exterior, there was an unmistakable longing in his eyes, perhaps for the past or the life he might have had. Clara dismissed the thought and shifted the conversation to logistics, eager to maintain a professional distance. When the meeting ended, Eduardo lingered, watching Clara gather her materials. Something about her struck a chord deep within him. He couldn't shake the sense that he had missed something monumental, a truth lingering just beyond his grasp. As Clara walked out of the room, her heart raced, not with longing but with the knowledge that Eduardo's world was about to change forever. Stepping into the elevator, Clara exhaled deeply. This was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, not in reclaiming her professional life, but in navigating the storm Eduardo's reappearance would inevitably bring to her daughters' lives. Clara wasn't just a pharmaceutical executive or a single mother. She was the fierce protector of two girls who deserved the world, and she wasn't about to let anyone disrupt their carefully built stability. Back at her newly purchased brownstone in a vibrant Brooklyn neighborhood, the twins greeted Clara with excited chatter about their day. Emily, with her boundless energy, and Sophia, with her thoughtful observations, filled the space with warmth and joy. As Clara kissed them goodnight, she couldn't help but wonder how long this delicate balance would last. Eduardo's presence threatened to unravel everything, and yet, deep down, she knew that shielding her daughters from the truth forever was not an option. The steady hum of Manhattan's evening traffic echoed as Clara returned home, her mind a whirl of memories and unresolved emotions. She placed her briefcase on the kitchen counter, the rich aroma of roses cooking greeting her. Her mother had always been a pillar of support, stepping in to help raise Emily and Sophia without hesitation. Rose glanced up from the stove, her sharp eyes catching the subtle tension in Clara's posture. "Long day?" Rose asked, her voice gentle but probing. Clara hesitated before nodding. "I had a presentation," she replied, measuring her words. "It went well." But Rose's questioning gaze demanded more. Clara sighed, pulling out a chair at the dining table. It was for Martinez Pharmaceuticals. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Rose's hands stilled, the clatter of a wooden spoon against the pot ceasing. "Eduardo?" Clara nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "He was there. He didn't recognize me at first." She paused, exhaling deeply. "He doesn't know about Emily and Sophia." "Not yet." Rose sat across from her, the weight of their shared understanding palpable. "He has a right to know," Rose said softly, though her voice carried an edge of warning. Clara shook her head. "Not yet. The girls come first. Always." Upstairs, Emily and Sophia were immersed in their nightly routine, unaware of the turmoil brewing below. Emily sprawled across the bed, flipping through a book with dramatic flair, while Sophia carefully arranged her violin in its case. The two shared a bond as unshakable as their differences, Emily's exuberance balancing Sophia's quiet precision. "Do you think Mama will let us go to the park this weekend?" Emily asked, her words bubbling with enthusiasm. Sophia tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe, but she's been so busy lately." Their conversation shifted to laughter as Emily devised an impromptu plan to convince Clara. Their innocence and unbridled joy were a stark contrast to the storm in Clara's heart. Downstairs, Clara resolved to protect that joy at all costs, even as the shadows of her past threatened to encroach. The next morning, Clara's routine was interrupted by an email. It was from Eduardo, thanking her for the presentation and suggesting a follow-up meeting. His tone was formal, but hinted at curiosity. Clara's heart clenched as she read his words, her mind racing with the implications of their next encounter. She couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. That evening, Eduardo found himself staring out of his office window, the city skyline sprawling before him. The encounter with Clara had stirred something within him, a sense of unfinished business he couldn't ignore. Her professionalism and poise were impressive, but it was her familiarity that gnawed at him. There was something about her he couldn't place, something that made him question everything he thought he knew. The rain fell steadily on Manhattan, its rhythm a comforting backdrop as Clara prepared for her next meeting with Eduardo. This time, the stakes felt higher, not because of the business deal but because of the growing realization that the truth about Emily and Sophia would soon come to light. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. At Martinez Pharmaceuticals, Eduardo greeted her with a handshake and a disarming smile. His charm was as potent as ever, but Clara's resolve remained unshaken. They discussed logistics, market strategies, and projections, their conversation flowing seamlessly. Yet, beneath the surface, Eduardo's questions grew more personal, more probing. "You seem familiar," he said suddenly, his voice thoughtful. "Have we met before?" Clara's heart skipped a beat, but her response was measured. "Perhaps at a conference. The pharmaceutical industry is a small world." Eduardo nodded, though the answer didn't satisfy him. There was a vulnerability in his gaze, a flicker of regret that hinted at the cracks beneath his polished exterior. Clara noticed it, but refused to let it sway her. She had spent too long rebuilding her life to let old wounds reopen so easily. After the meeting, Eduardo lingered. "Clara," he began hesitantly, "there's something about you. I can't put my finger on it, but—" He trailed off, his expression pained. Clara forced a smile. "I appreciate your interest, but let's keep this professional," she replied, her tone firm. As she walked away, Eduardo's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had overlooked something crucial, a piece of his past that was now standing right in front of him. His thoughts drifted to his mother, Maria, whose wisdom often guided him through difficult times. Perhaps it was time to seek her advice. Meanwhile, back at the brownstone, Emily and Sophia's curiosity about their father had begun to surface. Sophia, ever observant, had noticed the lack of family photos featuring a father figure. One evening, as Clara tucked them in, Sophia hesitated before asking, "Mama, why don't we have a dad like other kids?" The question hit Clara like a thunderbolt. She paused, searching for the right words. "Every family is different, sweetheart," she said gently. "And our family is full of love, just the way it is." Emily, always quick to chime in, added, "But what if we had a dad? Would he play games with us? Would he come to our violin recitals?" Clara kissed their foreheads, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I don't know, my loves. But what I do know is that you two are the most important people in my world." As the twins drifted off to sleep, Clara sat by their bedside, the weight of their questions pressing heavily on her. She knew the time was approaching when she could no longer shield them from the truth. And as Eduardo's presence loomed larger in her life, the delicate balance she had fought so hard to maintain felt more precarious than ever. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the city, but Clara felt no comfort in its light. Eduardo's lingering curiosity after their last meeting weighed on her. She sensed his growing determination to uncover the past, and it terrified her. Though she had rebuilt her life brick by brick, Eduardo's reappearance was like a gust of wind, threatening to topple her carefully constructed walls. Sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, Clara found herself staring at her phone, debating her next move. Rose walked in, carrying a basket of laundry, her perceptive gaze immediately locking onto her daughter. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Rose asked, setting the basket down. Clara looked up, startled. "It's not like that," she said quickly. "But he's persistent. I think he knows something is off, even if he doesn't realize what." Rose sat across from her, her hands folded. "You can't keep the truth from him forever. The girls are asking questions. Sophia is too smart to ignore the gaps. And Emily, well, she's just too curious." Clara sighed, cradling the mug. "I know, but what if it all falls apart? What if he comes in, shakes everything up, and then leaves again? I can't risk them getting hurt." "Maybe," Rose replied, her tone softer now, "but maybe he's changed. People do, you know. Sometimes life has a way of forcing us to look at ourselves." Later that day, Eduardo visited his mother, Maria, in her cozy Brooklyn apartment. The scent of garlic and spices filled the air as she prepared arroz con pollo, her weathered hands moving deftly through years of practiced rhythm. Eduardo sat at the kitchen table, lost in thought. Maria noticed his silence and paused to study him. "You've been distant lately," Maria said, stirring the pot. "What's on your mind, mi hijo?" Eduardo hesitated before speaking. "I met someone at work, a woman from my past. She's brilliant, successful, but there's something more, something familiar. I can't explain it, but it feels like I've missed something important." Maria placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Life often shows us what we need to see when we're ready to see it. Perhaps there's something this woman is meant to teach you." Her words stayed with him as he returned to his Manhattan apartment that evening. For years, Eduardo had been consumed by his career, chasing success at the cost of his personal life. Now, faced with Clara's unexpected reappearance, he began to question the emptiness of his accomplishments. A flicker of guilt settled in his chest, though he couldn't quite pinpoint its origin. Back at the brownstone, Clara decided to take the twins to the park. The vibrant fall foliage painted the neighborhood in shades of orange and gold, a reminder of the fleeting beauty of life seasons. Emily raced ahead, her laughter ringing out as she chased a fluttering leaf. Sophia walked more deliberately, her small hand slipping into Clara's. "Mama," Sophia said quietly, "do you think people can change?" Clara knelt to meet her daughter's gaze, startled by the depth of the question. "I think it's possible, sweetheart. But it takes time and a lot of effort." Sophia nodded thoughtfully, her eyes betraying a wisdom far beyond her years. Clara hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of her daughter's unspoken hopes and fears. Later that evening, as Clara prepared dinner, her phone buzzed with a message from Eduardo. He proposed a follow-up meeting, but his tone carried an undercurrent of personal interest. Clara stared at the screen, her resolve wavering. For all her fears, part of her wondered if confronting the past might finally bring the closure she so desperately needed. Eduardo arrived at the cafe earlier than planned, choosing a quiet corner table where the city's noise faded to a murmur. Clara entered moments later, her expression carefully neutral. She carried an air of professionalism, but Eduardo noticed the way her fingers tightened around her bag. "Thank you for meeting me," he began, his voice warm but measured. Clara nodded, her walls firmly in place. "Of course. What's the follow-up about?" Eduardo hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "This isn't just about business. There's something I need to ask you." He paused, searching her face. "Do we have a history I should remember? Because I can't shake the feeling that there's more between us than you're letting on." Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her expression calm. "We crossed paths years ago," she admitted, carefully choosing her words. "But it was brief and complicated." Eduardo studied her, his gaze unwavering. "Complicated how?" Before Clara could respond, the waiter approached with their drinks, breaking the tension. Clara took the moment to regain her composure. "We were very different people back then," she said finally. "I've moved on, Eduardo, and I suggest you do the same." The words stung, but Eduardo wasn't deterred. There was a determination in his eyes now, a quiet resolve to uncover the truth. As Clara left the cafe, Eduardo sat back, replaying every interaction they'd had. The pieces weren't fitting together, but he was certain there was a missing link he needed to find. Meanwhile, back at the brownstone, Emily and Sophia were rummaging through an old box of photographs. "Look, it's Mama when she was younger," Emily exclaimed, holding up a picture. Sophia's eyes widened as she studied the photo. "Who's that man with her?" she asked, pointing to Eduardo's unmistakable face. Emily frowned. "Maybe he's a friend. Or—" Her voice trailed off as curiosity overtook her. When Clara returned home, she found the twins waiting for her, the photo resting on the coffee table. Her heart sank as she realized what they discovered. Emily's bright eyes looked up at her expectantly. "Mama, who is this?" she asked, her tone innocent but insistent. Clara sat down, pulling the twins close. "That's someone from a long time ago," she said softly. "He was important to me once, but things didn't work out." "Is he our dad?" Sophia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara's breath caught, and she knew she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. "Yes," she admitted, her voice trembling. "That's your father." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. Emily's eyes lit up with curiosity, while Sophia's brow furrowed in thought. "Can we meet him?" Emily asked eagerly. Clara hesitated, her heart torn between protecting her daughters and honoring their growing need for answers. "We'll see," she said finally, her voice filled with both hope and uncertainty. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Clara. Emily's excitement about the possibility of meeting her father was infectious, while Sophia remained introspective, her questions more cautious and thoughtful. Clara grappled with how to navigate their growing curiosity without destabilizing the sense of security she had worked so hard to cultivate. She sat at her desk one evening, a stack of client reports before her, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on Eduardo, on the truth she had finally admitted to her daughters, and on the path that lay ahead. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. It was Eduardo again, requesting another meeting. Clara sighed, recognizing that she couldn't keep brushing him off. This time, her response was deliberate and measured. She agreed to meet him, but only in a personal capacity, and she set the location at a quiet park in Brooklyn. Her intention was clear. She would begin to bridge the gap for the sake of her daughters, but on her terms. When Eduardo arrived at the park, he was surprised to see the casual side of Clara. She was dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, her usual polished armor set aside. Clara didn't offer pleasantries, diving straight into the heart of the matter. "Eduardo," she began, her voice steady but firm, "I think it's time you knew the truth. 5 years ago, when you left, I discovered I was pregnant." Eduardo froze, the weight of her words crashing over him. "Pregnant?" he echoed, his voice barely audible. "Yes," Clara continued, her tone unyielding. Twins, Emily and Sophia. They're 7 now, and they're everything to me. Everything. I didn't tell you because I didn't think you deserved to know after the way you left. But things have changed. They're asking questions about you, and I can't keep the truth from them anymore. Eduardo's expression was a storm of emotions. Shock, guilt, and a glimmer of hope. Twins, he repeated, as though trying to anchor himself to the revelation. Clara, he paused, struggling to find the words. I don't even know where to begin. I had no idea. You didn't because you didn't stay, Clara snapped, her composure momentarily cracking. You left me to figure it all out on my own. And I did. So don't think for a second that this is about you swooping in and playing hero now. Eduardo's shoulders sagged, the weight of her accusation sinking in. You're right, he admitted. I made terrible choices. But I want to make it right, Clara. Please, let me meet them. Let me try to be the father they deserve. Clara studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his eyes. This isn't about you making amends, she said. This is about them. If I agree to this, it's because they want it, not because I need you in their lives. Eduardo nodded solemnly. Understood. Whatever it takes. The next weekend, Clara prepared the girls for their first meeting with Eduardo. She explained that he was coming over to visit, careful not to raise their expectations too high. Emily was practically bouncing with excitement, while Sophia stayed quiet, her emotions guarded. Clara wondered if her younger daughter's reserved nature reflected her own. When Eduardo arrived at the brownstone, he was nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. Success in the boardroom had never fazed him, but standing on Clara's doorstep, about to meet his daughters, left him feeling vulnerable. Clara opened the door, her expression a mix of tension and resolve. Behind her, 2 sets of curious eyes peered out from the living room. Come in, Clara said, stepping aside. Eduardo entered, his gaze immediately falling on the twins. Emily was the first to approach him, her boundless energy cutting through the awkwardness. Hi, I'm Emily, she declared, her bright smile infectious. Eduardo knelt to her level, his voice soft. Hi, Emily. It's so nice to meet you. Sophia hung back, clutching a small stuffed animal. Eduardo noticed her hesitation and didn't push. Instead, he smiled at her gently. You must be Sophia, he said. I've heard a lot about you. Sophia's eyes flicked to Clara, seeking reassurance. Clara gave her a small nod, and after a moment, Sophia stepped forward cautiously. Hi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eduardo's heart swelled with emotion as he took in the sight of his daughters. They were so different yet equally captivating, and he couldn't believe he had missed 7 years of their lives. Determined to make a good impression, he spent the afternoon answering their questions, listening to their stories, and doing his best to understand their world. Emily dominated the conversation, peppering him with questions about his favorite foods, games, and movies. Sophia, though quieter, observed him intently, her thoughtful gaze never leaving his face. Eduardo noticed the way she watched him, as though weighing his every word and action. It was clear that winning her trust would take time. As the day wore on, Clara watched from a distance, her emotions a tangled mix of relief, apprehension, and something she couldn't quite name. Eduardo's efforts were genuine, and the girls seemed to respond to him in their own ways. Still, she couldn't let her guard down. Too much was at stake. That evening, as Eduardo prepared to leave, Emily hugged him tightly. Will you come back soon? She asked, her voice hopeful. Of course, Eduardo replied, his voice thick with emotion. If your mom says it's okay. Sophia stood nearby, her expression inscrutable. Eduardo knelt to her level. Thank you for letting me spend time with you today, he said softly. Sophia hesitated before nodding. You're welcome, she said, her voice small but sincere. After Eduardo left, Clara tucked the girls into bed, their chatter filled with excitement about the day. Sophia was quieter than usual, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. As Clara kissed her goodnight, Sophia asked, Do you think he'll stay this time? Clara's chest tightened, and she stroked her daughter's hair gently. I hope so, sweetheart, she said. But no matter what happens, you and Emily will always have me. As Clara closed the bedroom door, she leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the day's events. Eduardo's presence had stirred old wounds, but it had also opened a door to possibilities she hadn't dared to consider. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering if healing might truly be within reach, for herself, for Eduardo, and most importantly, for their daughters. The following weeks brought a tentative rhythm to the new dynamic between Eduardo and his daughters. Eduardo visited regularly, often bringing small gifts, books for Sophia, who cherished her quiet moments, and puzzles for Emily, whose boundless energy seemed to thrive on challenges. Clara observed these visits with a wary eye, her emotions torn between the cautious optimism she felt for her daughter's happiness and the lingering distrust she harbored for Eduardo. On one particular afternoon, Eduardo invited the girls and Clara to a park in Brooklyn for a picnic. Emily raced ahead, her laughter ringing through the crisp autumn air. Sophia walked beside Eduardo, clutching a book he had given her. Clara trailed behind, watching them interact from a distance. Eduardo's efforts were genuine, but Clara couldn't ignore the small voice in her mind that warned her to stay guarded. As the picnic unfolded, Eduardo spread out a blanket, carefully arranging the sandwiches and snacks he had prepared with Maria's guidance. Emily eagerly helped, her chatter filling the space as she recounted a school story. Eduardo listened intently, his attention fully on her. For Sophia, he brought out a special surprise, a book about Cuban folklore, complete with colorful illustrations. "I thought you might like this," Eduardo said, handing it to Sophia. Her eyes lit up as she opened the book, tracing the vibrant drawings with her small fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge of warmth that Clara hadn't heard before. As the day wore on, Eduardo suggested a game of soccer. Emily jumped at the idea, tugging on Eduardo's hand. "Come on, let's play," she exclaimed. Sophia hesitated but eventually joined, her cautious smile growing as Eduardo cheered her on. Clara watched from the sidelines, her chest tightening as she saw her daughters laugh and play with their father. It was a picture of a family she hadn't dared to imagine. But the day wasn't without its complications. At one point, Emily tripped and scraped her knee. The sight of blood sent her into a panicked wail, and Eduardo rushed to her side, his face pale with worry. Clara intervened swiftly, cleaning the wound with practiced ease. Emily clung to her mother, her tears slowing as Clara whispered soothing words. Eduardo stepped back, visibly shaken. "I should have been there to handle it," he murmured, his voice heavy with regret. Clara looked up sharply. "This isn't about proving yourself," she said. "It's about being present, and that takes time." Her words stung, but Eduardo nodded, understanding the weight of her statement. As they packed up the picnic, Eduardo carried Emily on his back, her laughter restored as she teased him about his lack of soccer skills. Sophia walked quietly beside Clara, holding her hand. The balance between joy and unease lingered, but for the first time, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. The revelation of Eduardo's Cuban heritage brought a new layer of connection to his relationship with the girls. At Maria's insistence, Eduardo invited Clara and the twins to his mother's home for a family dinner. Clara hesitated at first, wary of introducing the girls to more unfamiliar territory, but Emily's excitement and Sophia's growing curiosity tipped the scales. Maria's apartment was a vibrant reflection of her Cuban roots. The scent of simmering spices filled the air, and the walls were adorned with family photos and colorful art. Maria greeted them warmly, pulling the girls into a gentle hug. "You must be Emily and Sophia," she said, her voice rich with affection. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." Emily responded with her usual exuberance, peppering Maria with questions about her cooking and the trinkets scattered around the apartment. Sophia, ever watchful, stayed close to Clara, her gaze taking in every detail. Maria noticed her hesitation and knelt to her level, offering a small smile. "Would you like to help me in the kitchen, mi amor?" she asked gently. Sophia glanced at Clara for approval before nodding. As Maria guided her through the preparation of the arroz con pollo, Sophia's initial shyness gave way to quiet engagement. Emily, meanwhile, insisted on helping Eduardo set the table, her chatter filling the room. The dinner was a feast of flavors and stories. Maria regaled the girls with tales of her childhood in Cuba, weaving in bits of history and culture. Emily listened with wide-eyed fascination, while Sophia asked thoughtful questions about the traditions Maria described. Clara watched with a mixture of amazement and trepidation as her daughters connected with a part of their heritage they had never known. During the meal, Eduardo made an effort to engage with Clara, his tone cautious but sincere. "I hope this helps," he said softly, gesturing to the girls' interaction with Maria. "I want them to know where they come from." Clara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "It's a start," she replied, her voice measured. After dinner, Maria brought out an old box of family photos. The girls crowded around her as she shared stories about Eduardo's childhood. One photo, in particular, caught their attention. A young Eduardo holding a soccer ball, his grin wide and mischievous. "You played soccer?" Emily exclaimed, looking up at him in disbelief. "But you're terrible." The room erupted in laughter, and for a moment, the air was filled with unfiltered joy. Clara couldn't help but smile, though the moment was bittersweet. She saw the effort Eduardo was making, the way he was trying to rebuild what he had lost, but the scars of the past lingered, a constant reminder of the pain he had caused. As they prepared to leave, Maria pulled Clara aside. "He's trying, you know," she said softly. "He's not the man he was when he left. I see it in his eyes." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe. But trust doesn't come easily, not after everything." Maria placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Give him time. And give yourself time too. Healing isn't easy, but it's worth it." On the drive home, the girls chattered excitedly about the dinner, their voices filled with newfound curiosity about their Cuban roots. Clara listened, her heart a tangle of emotions. Eduardo's efforts were undeniable, but the road ahead was still uncertain. For now, all she could do was take it one step at a time, guided by her daughter's happiness and her own hard-earned resilience. The chill of winter had begun to settle over New York, the first hints of frost decorating the brownstones' windows. Eduardo's visits had become a regular part of the girls' lives, their connection to him strengthening with each encounter. Clara observed his growth with a mixture of guarded hope and persistent skepticism. He was making strides, but the scars of abandonment lingered, a reminder that trust was not easily rebuilt. One Saturday morning, Eduardo invited the girls to an ice skating rink in Manhattan. Clara decided to join them, not entirely comfortable leaving the girls alone with Eduardo yet. The rink was alive with the laughter of families and the sound of blades scraping the ice. Emily, ever the adventurous one, immediately demanded to skate without assistance. Eduardo laughed, steadying her as she wobbled onto the ice. "Hold on, champ," he said, his voice warm. "Let's take it one step at a time." Sophia clung to Clara's hand as they stepped onto the ice. Her reluctance was evident, her movements cautious. Eduardo skated over, extending a hand to his quieter daughter. "You don't have to let go if you're not ready," he said gently. "But I'll be right here if you want to try." Sophia hesitated, her eyes darting between Clara and Eduardo. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Eduardo smiled, his heart swelling as he guided her along the edge of the rink. Clara watched the scene unfold, her emotions a mix of pride and uncertainty. Eduardo's patience and attentiveness with the girls were undeniable, but the wounds of his past actions made it hard for her to fully let her guard down. As the afternoon progressed, the girls grew more confident on the ice, their laughter ringing out as they attempted small spins and stumbles. Eduardo was fully engaged, cheering them on and joining in their playful antics. For a moment, it felt almost natural, as if they were a family unbroken by time or mistakes. When they returned home, Eduardo lingered at the door, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for letting me spend time with them," he said, his voice low. "It means more than you know." Clara nodded, her response measured. "They're happy," she said simply. "That's what matters." As Eduardo left, Clara closed the door, leaning against it with a sigh. The day had been a step forward, but her heart remained conflicted. Could she truly forgive him? Could she allow herself to believe that this time he would stay? The holidays arrived, bringing a flurry of excitement to the brownstone. Emily and Sophia reveled in decorating the house, their giggles filling the air as they argued over where to hang ornaments. Eduardo had offered to join them for Christmas Eve dinner, a suggestion Clara had reluctantly agreed to after the girl's persistent pleading. It was a milestone she hadn't anticipated, but the joy in her daughter's eyes made it hard to refuse. Maria arrived early to help with the preparations, her warmth filling the house as she shared stories about Cuban Christmas traditions. She brought a platter of tamales and homemade flan, her laughter contagious as she recounted Eduardo's childhood mishaps during the holidays. The girls listened with rapt attention, their curiosity about their father's past deepening. When Eduardo arrived, he carried a stack of gifts wrapped in festive paper. Emily's eyes lit up as she dove into the pile, while Sophia carefully placed hers under the tree, her excitement more subdued. Eduardo knelt by the tree, helping Sophia arrange the packages. "I used to do this with my mom," he said, glancing at Maria. "She always insisted the gifts be perfectly aligned." Sophia smiled faintly, her quiet nature softening in the warmth of the moment. Clara watched from the kitchen, her emotions a swirl of gratitude and apprehension. She couldn't deny the joy Eduardo brought to the girls, but the walls she had built around her heart remained firmly in place. As they sat down to dinner, the atmosphere was surprisingly light. Eduardo shared anecdotes about his time in Cuba with Maria, weaving humor into his tales. Emily laughed uproariously at his exaggerated impressions, while Sophia's quiet giggles punctuated the conversation. Clara found herself smiling despite her reservations, the warmth of the evening momentarily eclipsing her doubts. After dinner, Eduardo brought out one final surprise, a guitar. He strummed a few chords, and Maria joined in with a traditional Cuban lullaby. The girls clapped along, their faces alight with joy. Clara leaned against the doorway, her chest tightening as she watched the scene unfold. It was a glimpse of what could have been, had Eduardo stayed all those years ago. When the night ended, Eduardo kissed the girls goodnight, his voice tender as he promised to see them soon. As he turned to leave, he paused, looking at Clara. "Thank you," he said, his tone earnest, "for letting me be here." Clara nodded, her voice soft. "They needed this," she said, "and maybe you did too." After Eduardo left, Clara sat by the glowing embers of the fireplace, her thoughts heavy. The evening had been a step toward healing, but the question lingered. Could they truly build something new from the broken pieces of their past? The new year brought with it an air of transformation. Eduardo had become a regular presence in the girls' lives, and his persistence was beginning to wear down the walls Clara had built. Emily and Sophia thrived under his attention, their bond with him deepening with each passing day. Even Clara found herself softening, though her heart remained cautious. One evening, Eduardo arrived at the brownstone with an unexpected proposition. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone tentative. "I'd like to take the girls to Cuba, to show them where they come from." Clara froze, her mind racing. The idea was daunting, a leap that felt too sudden, too risky. "Cuba?" she repeated, her voice laced with apprehension. "That's a lot." "I know," Eduardo said quickly, "but I want them to see that part of their heritage. It's important, and I'd like you to come too." The room fell silent as Clara processed his words. The idea of traveling together, of stepping further into this tenuous new reality, was overwhelming. But as she looked at Emily and Sophia's eager faces, she felt the faint stirrings of possibility. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice measured. The trip to Cuba became a turning point for the family. Walking the vibrant streets of Havana, surrounded by music, culture, and history, Clara saw a different side of Eduardo. His connection to the place, to his roots, was undeniable, and it brought out a depth in him she hadn't fully understood before. The girls embraced the experience with wide-eyed wonder, their curiosity bridging the gaps of time and distance. By the end of the trip, something had shifted. The fractures of their past hadn't disappeared, but they no longer felt insurmountable. As they stood on the beach, watching the sun set over the horizon, Eduardo took Clara's hand, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving us this chance." Clara looked out at the ocean, her heart full of emotions she hadn't dared to feel in years. "We're not there yet," she replied, her voice steady. "But maybe we're getting closer." And as the waves lapped at the shore, the Harrison Martinez family stood together, not whole but healing, bound by love, forgiveness, and the shared hope of a brighter future. Thank you for listening until the end. What did you think of this story? If you can, leave your feedback in the comments. It helps me improve and motivates me to keep sharing stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will also touch your heart. A big kiss, and see you in the next story.